Hola Carlota, ¿cómo estás?
Hola
¿Bien?
Juan Carlos. Muy bien, todo bien.
Yo quería presentarte, después de las reuniones que tuvimos y las sesiones con Caroline Daher, Natalie Müller, Laura Hidalgo, hoy tenemos el gusto y el placer de dar la bienvenida a Carlota Saenz y más tarde a David Britto. Todos parte del IES Global y de la segunda parte del seminario de Sistemas Urbanos Saludables. Carlota, muchas gracias. Una disculpa que no puedo estar presente, pero como profesor de proyectos, estoy lunes, miércoles y viernes in situ, pero sí que como director del programa, al igual que María Bustamante, que está presente allí mismo contigo, aprovecho de introducirla, a María Bustamante, directora de la Fundación Enric MX. Pues te damos la bienvenida a ambos. Te damos la bienvenida a ambos y de antemano te agradecemos por tu contribución, tu colaboración y bueno, looking forward.
Muchas gracias, Juan Carlos. Pues nada, encantada. Además, acabo de descubrir que también hay alumnos en línea siguiéndonos, o sea que encantada de estar aquí y de compartir con vosotros. Muchísimas gracias por la invitación. Bueno, mi idea era hacer una primera parte de la presentación ahora, luego, claro, no sabía que nos iban a seguir online, pero iba a hacer como un taller un poco más participativo, que fuera un poco más dinámico, y luego terminar con otra parte de la presentación ya hacia el final. Entonces, no sé si eso funcionaría o si preferís hacerlo de otra manera.
No, adelante,
Seguimos
como
el plan.
funciona. Mira, tenemos un
Vale.
estudiante en México que nos sigue, uno o dos que nos siguen online por temas de logística, protocolo y ajustes. Pero en realidad lo importante es lo que está pasando ahora en Barcelona, ¿no? Contigo en la Fundación Enric Miralles y con los chicos que se han sumado. Lo que creo que sí es importante, y déjame hacer un paréntesis, si eres tan amable, Carlota, es que el programa es un programa que tiene tres grandes componentes. El componente, lo que yo llamo el Design Research Studio, que es el taller de proyectos, el componente de sistemas urbanos saludables, que es el que llevan ustedes como el ICE Global, pero también el CCCCB, ¿vale? Y un tercer componente que es un poco lo que acabamos de pasar, que fue el viaje a Londres. Un viaje muy intenso de 4 días que nos permitió pues explorar y contrastar otras realidades en una ciudad complementaria. Entonces los chicos el martes estaban un poquito más cansados que ahora, supongo, ¿no? Porque acabamos de llegar a 2 horas de Londres, pero creo que hoy ya han recuperado y estamos a punto. Entonces, bueno, eso era un poco describirte el entorno del big picture, ¿no? Y adelante. Gracias.
Sí, gracias. Sí había escuchado que nos habías pasado ya algo de información sobre el programa, que viajabais a otros sitios. No sabía que ya habíais viajado a Londres. Bueno, ya me contaréis. Muy bien. Pues nada, yo les vengo a hablar sobre uno de los sistemas urbanos muy importantes, que es la vivienda y su entorno inmediato, tanto físico como social, que hablamos también de la comunidad, o sea, de los lazos sociales, la participación social, pero siempre un poco en ese ámbito de la vivienda y de lo residencial. Y los vínculos que existen entre todos esos diferentes dimensiones y la salud, porque existen, a veces están un poco más estudiados o más comprobados, otros quizás un poco menos, y entonces, bueno, los vamos a ir pues recorriendo y explicando. Entonces, bueno, mi nombre, como hemos dicho, es Carlota Saenz. Yo llevo algo más de 2 años trabajando en el Instituto de Salud Global de Barcelona, en la iniciativa en planificación urbana, medio ambiente y salud. Yo en realidad mi formación es de arquitecta y urbanista, entonces lo que pasa es que nunca me dediqué a la obra ni al proyecto, sino siempre a la investigación. Y entonces enseguida, pues a través de la tesis doctoral y todo, pues me fui centrando en temas como de urbanismo, salud, y con eso pues al final encontré un hueco en Is Global, y lo interesante también ahí es que como trabajamos temas urbanos tan complejos y multidisciplinares, pues la verdad que trabajamos muchos sectores y muchos perfiles juntos, ¿no? Entonces, pero bueno, creo que sois de arquitectura. Bueno, o sea que sois amigos, compañeros. Así que bueno, pues nada, empezamos. Hay que presionar aquí. Bueno, la vivienda sabemos que afecta a la salud de muchas maneras, y algunas pueden parecer relativamente pequeñas o menores, pero se van acumulando a lo largo del tiempo, y conjuntamente la vivienda constituye uno de los determinantes sociales clave sobre la salud. No sé si os han hablado sobre los determinantes de la salud. Al final son como los factores que influyen o que determinan cuál es nuestro estado de salud. Entonces hay factores que sabemos que son pues, de nuestra edad, nuestras condiciones pues, genéticas, pero luego también están las condiciones en las que vivimos, sociales, nuestro entorno de trabajo, y en buena medida también nuestro entorno en el que vivimos, en el que residimos, porque pasamos muchas horas al día en la vivienda. En interiores, claro, una cosa aviso, tengo sobre todo muchos datos a nivel europeo, pero bueno, eso también, ya que están haciendo el viaje hasta aquí, pues a lo mejor les interesa. Pero bueno, es verdad que algunas cosas quizás no tengan paralelismo directo con otras regiones, ¿no? Pero bueno, la cuestión es que, por lo menos a nivel europeo, pasamos como el 90% de nuestro tiempo en espacios interiores, y el 70% de ese tiempo es mucho en la vivienda, sobre todo, claro, al dormir en la vivienda, pues ahí pasan muchas horas, ¿no? Entonces, pues aquí vemos que housing está... Ay, la pantalla se me housing sería el que está aquí en la esquina. No sé si me levanto. Ahí, pero también tenemos... Pero también tenemos los servicios de salud o acceso a agua y saneamiento. Todo eso, en buena medida, por ejemplo, acceso a agua y saneamiento, o sea, en la medida en la que la vivienda esté con sus instalaciones preparadas para ello, nos lo va a facilitar o no. La ubicación de la vivienda quizás nos permita un acceso, junto a otros factores, un acceso a determinados servicios de salud o a determinadas oportunidades de trabajo o de educación. O sea que no solo la vivienda física, sino también su emplazamiento, los servicios que hay alrededor, todo eso al final, digamos que entra dentro de los factores que influyen sobre nuestra salud y calidad de vida, ¿no? Entendiendo lógicamente la salud, pues como describe la OMS, que es como el bienestar físico, mental y social, ¿no? No solo es la ausencia de enfermedad. No, yo no por no estar enfermo en un momento determinado significa necesariamente que esté en buena salud, que disfrute de una buena salud, digamos, completa. O sea que es siempre desde esta visión, digamos, holística de lo que significa la salud y la calidad de vida y el bienestar. Entonces, bueno. También sabemos que durante la pandemia ha habido... bueno, al menos, por ejemplo, en España ha habido 2 meses y pico o más, ahora no me recuerdo exactamente, de confinamiento estricto en la vivienda, y luego, excepto aquellas personas que podían salir pues porque tenían trabajos digamos que se consideraban esenciales, la mayor parte de la gente tuvo que quedarse en casa, y eso también trajo consigo, o sea, desigualdades que ya existen en temas de vivienda se exacerbaron precisamente porque aquellas personas que vivían en peores condiciones se vieron abocadas a vivir en esas condiciones durante el 100% de su tiempo. Y además son esas personas las que sacan más beneficio de un entorno que precisamente, como no pueden encontrar esos beneficios dentro de la vivienda, pues de suficiente espacio, de exposición a lo mejor a espacios verdes, incluso de más privacidad. O sea, todo eso, al no poder hacer uso del exterior, pues digamos que minaba incluso más su salud. O sea que si para todos fue duro, para las personas pues, más desfavorecidas o que vivían en peores condiciones, pues peor. También si tenían alguna deficiencia física en la vivienda, de humedades, proliferación de moho, todo ese tipo de cosas, obviamente la exposición era mayor porque estaban más horas en casa, ¿no? Entonces, bueno, digamos que esto, a raíz también del confinamiento y de la pandemia, yo creo que se ha avivado un poco más la reflexión sobre cómo ha de ser una vivienda hoy en día para satisfacer nuestras necesidades y, más allá de satisfacer nuestras necesidades, también proteger nuestra salud y poder garantizarla, ¿no? Entonces, que no es un debate nuevo, pero que yo creo que se ha ido pues renovando en esta nueva tesitura. Entonces, como reflexiones, ¿qué es lo que pedimos a nuestras viviendas tanto hoy como de cara al futuro? Pues, como decía, pasamos mucho tiempo en interiores, aproximadamente el 70% del tiempo en nuestra vivienda. Y además, las predicciones todas nos llevan a pensar que ese tiempo se mantenga o incluso crezca, porque aumente, porque está aumentando muchísimo el formato del teletrabajo, incluso en sectores en los que antes parecía que era muy difícil o imposible. También la educación a distancia. También, bueno, esto es más de ámbito europeo, pero hay unas tendencias demográficas de envejecimiento muy preocupantes y muy importantes. Las personas mayores, igual que los niños o que las personas dependientes, pasan más tiempo en su casa también, por diversas razones, ¿no? De movilidad, etcétera. Entonces también eso les hace grupos más vulnerables a determinadas cosas de salud, tanto por sus condiciones de otro tipo, y también porque si hay una exposición nociva dentro de la vivienda, pues van a estar incluso más expuestos, ¿no? Entonces, luego está una cosa que ya en realidad, aunque parezca que sea de cara al futuro, es bastante real, que es cómo nos pueda proteger las viviendas de eventos meteorológicos extremos, temperaturas extremas, todo efecto del cambio climático. O sea, por ejemplo, aquí ahora se están repitiendo las olas de calor cada vez con más frecuencia, cada vez con más intensidad, y además en entornos urbanos, exacerbado por el efecto isla de calor, ¿no? ¿Habéis oído hablar del efecto isla de calor? Vale. O sea, si alguien quiere que les diga, o sea, que aclare algún concepto, lo aclaramos.
Isla de calor, pero los hace como un poco concentrado, ¿no?
No, el efecto, o sea, durante una ola de calor, lo que pasa es que en entornos urbanos que son muy, digamos, impermeables, que tienen pues mucho hormigón, mucha superficie que no es verde y que no es permeable, lo que ocurre es que como tiene tanta inercia térmica, absorbe más calor y acaba aumentando mucho. O sea, el efecto isla de calor en realidad se define como el aumento de la temperatura en entornos urbanos mucho mayor que en su zona, digamos, cercana, rural. O sea, entonces, digamos que ante el mismo evento de ola de calor, pues van a sufrirlo mucho más las personas que están en esas zonas donde se acumula el calor, porque además al tener la inercia térmica, eso acumula mucho calor, cuando baja la temperatura lo emite, de modo que por la noche no refresca suficientemente, y bueno, pues es una cosa que además se retroalimenta, porque entonces usamos más el aire acondicionado tiene expulsión que da afuera y entonces incluso exacerba también las diferencias sociales, porque aquel que puede permitirse el aire acondicionado está en realidad empeorando la situación para aquellos que no se lo pueden permitir por estar usando. O sea,
que es un clima que empeora ante no se use.
Claro, es que no es el huevo o la gallina, no sé, o sea, que al final no sabes dónde empieza, pero la cuestión es que existe el efecto de isla de calor que es muy importante y nuestras viviendas muchas veces no están preparadas para ello. Y lo que pasa es que también, de la misma forma, hay estrategias urbanas, algunas de lo más sencillas, que pueden intentar mitigar esos efectos de isla de calor. O sea, pero bueno, eso ya lo hablaremos. La cuestión, vale, pues vosotros me vais parando si hay algún concepto que queráis que aclaremos. Y luego, por supuesto, bueno, con el COVID, el confinamiento y tal, pues por ejemplo, algunos estudios que han estado estudiando pues cómo ha sido la experiencia, ¿no? En según qué tipo de viviendas y tal, pues sí que nos muestran que hay un reclamo, una necesidad de mayor flexibilidad, de mayor espacio en general, porque también si quieres flexibilidad es porque necesitas también más espacio, más multifuncionalidad de los espacios, o sea, que no sea el aislamiento tanto térmico como sobre todo acústico, cuando quieres hacer varias actividades distintas en diferentes habitaciones, cuando no hay un aislamiento acústico muchas veces es imposible, ¿no? Sobre todo con teletrabajo o telestudio y eso. Y luego también se ha puesto de manifiesto una falta de acceso a espacios verdes, tanto dentro de la vivienda, que a veces son difíciles porque según qué tipo de vivienda sea, pues no va a poder tenerlo, como luego cercanos. Entonces, bueno, es un poco reflexiones de cómo ha de ser esa vivienda pues, de cara al futuro. Bueno, aquí hay unos datos de la vivienda típica española para vuestra información e interés. No sé, también me preguntaba hasta qué punto sería distinto al parque de viviendas en vuestra ciudad. Entonces, ahí también me decís. Yo os cuento. Esto es la típica española. La ciudad de Barcelona se asemejaría un poquito a esto. No quiere decir que todas sean así, por supuesto, pero la mayor parte del parque de viviendas en España, por ejemplo, es pisos, que eso es muy llamativo. Dentro, o sea, comparado con el resto de países europeos, nosotros somos dentro de lo que es el parque de viviendas el que mayor porcentaje tiene de pisos. Entonces hay muchísima población que vive en pisos, o sea, en apartamentos. Y además, la mayor parte de ellos están construidos antes de 1980. No tienen aislamiento térmico. Con suerte tendrán una cámara de aire, pero normalmente es sin nada. Luego es muy habitual que los ocupantes tengan la propiedad de la vivienda, porque hay poco alquiler, también porque hay poco alquiler social y entonces al final, en cuanto, o sea, los alquileres son muy caros, entonces en cuanto la gente tiene una posibilidad, pues intenta comprar porque no le sale a cuentas. Esto tiene muchas componentes. Sin entrar en ello mucho, la verdad es que hay mucho propietario que vive en su propia vivienda, frente a otros países u otras ciudades, por ejemplo, que trabajan mucho más el tema del alquiler. Luego, claro, falta de aislamiento térmico, construcción antigua y tal, certificación energética, no sé si usáis vosotros lo de las letras igual. Bueno, pues la A es la mejor, la C no está muy bien, pero bueno, y luego de ahí va bajando hasta la G, que ya es la peor. Entonces la certificación energética es C o inferior. Es muy raro ya, excepto construcciones como muy nuevas y casi como que superan la normativa vigente o que pues las passive house o todo este tipo de cosas, esas ya alcanzan el A, pero desde luego hablamos como de viviendas que no van a superar la C normalmente, a no ser que hagan una reforma interior increíble y apliquen, pero aún así es difícil. Luego es muy habitual, de nuevo, por construcciones antiguas, que haya barreras arquitectónicas, problemas de accesibilidad. Eso es muy habitual y veremos que tiene un impacto sobre la salud de los ocupantes muy importante. Sobre todo si hablamos de personas pues, envejecidas o bueno, personas con algún problema de movilidad, ¿no? Luego, en cuanto al perfil, ¿no?, del hogar, pues es muy habitual que sea pues, una pareja con al menos un hijo y mucha gente también viviendo sola, que normalmente, además, por esto que digo también de que la población está envejeciendo, es mayor de 65 años. Entonces hay muchas personas mayores de 65 años que viven solas. También hemos visto que son especialmente vulnerables a determinados riesgos, a pobreza energética, y, bueno, y a otras cosas. Muchas veces no se pueden permitir tampoco hacer reformas para mejorar determinadas condiciones de la vivienda, etc. Bueno. Además, como decía antes, esto es para daros un poco el sabor de la vivienda española, es esto que os decía antes, de que el porcentaje de pisos en su parque de viviendas es destacado respecto a otros países europeos. Y hay unas encuestas que se hacen creo que son cada 2 años, europeas de calidad de vida, que preguntan sobre diversas cosas, algunas son de la vivienda, y lo que destacaban en España es que la gente echaba en falta acceso a espacios abiertos exteriores en la vivienda, lo cual no es sorprendente si hay tanto porcentaje de pisos. Es decir, que también los pisos lo que pasa es que tienen poco espacio exterior o es de mala calidad, etc. Pero hay otros problemas, lógicamente, como falta de espacio, pisos demasiado pequeños, falta de luz natural, o sea, de soleamiento, dificultad para ventilar adecuadamente, problemas de accesibilidad, como decía. Bueno, entonces, como decía antes, con el COVID también pues, fueron saliendo muchas noticias, muchas así. O sea, de repente empezó a estar en el ámbito, digamos, público un poco más el tema de qué pasa en los pisos y por qué muchos no son adecuados, incluso cuando pagamos muchísimo dinero por ellos, ¿no? O sea, que es que no es... O sea, ya no hablamos de los casos más extremos, de los que son pisos de muy mala calidad y para poblaciones como muy marginales, no, es que estamos hablando de que hay muchísima gente que paga mucho dinero por pisos que no están en buenas condiciones y muy poca gente que realmente viva en casas que sean absolutamente saludables, ¿no? Bueno, entonces, solo por dar unas cifras, la Organización Mundial de la Salud también, lógicamente, sabe y constata la relación que hay entre condiciones de la vivienda y la salud. De hecho, estima que en Europa hay más de 100.000 muertes y enfermedades al año que están vinculadas a condiciones inadecuadas de la vivienda. Claro, condiciones, cuando hablamos de condiciones inadecuadas de la vivienda, son muchas, ¿no? Y pues es desde no tener suficiente, o sea, temperatura adecuada en invierno y entonces padecer demasiado frío, como padecer demasiado calor en verano, como tener goteras y humedades, moho, que también afectan sobre todo a la salud respiratoria. Y bueno, luego otros aspectos que tienen también una componente social, como pues también el no poder acceder a determinados tipos de vivienda o pagar demasiado por ello, o sea, un porcentaje demasiado alto de nuestros ingresos se dedica a la vivienda y por tanto a lo mejor nos deja sin capacidad para permitirnos otros tipos de gastos y otras necesidades, ¿no? Luego el hacinamiento, por ejemplo, es un problema muy importante en el que se ha encontrado mucho vínculo entre vivienda y salud. ¿El hacinamiento sabemos lo que es? O sobreocupación. O sea, básicamente es vivir demasiadas personas en un espacio demasiado reducido. Tiene una componente también cultural. No hay una definición estándar universal de lo que significa el hacinamiento, porque es distinto en determinados países según el estándar o las costumbres. A veces es más habitual, por ejemplo, que haya varias familias viviendo en una sola vivienda o más intergeneracionalidad. O sea, en algunas culturas, en algunos países es más habitual y en otras menos. Entonces, bueno, digamos que cada gran región mundial tiene una definición, pero así como la idea principal es que hay mucha gente viviendo demasiado junta en una vivienda. Entonces,
¿Hacinamiento era?
¿eh?
¿Hacinamiento o hacinamiento?
Hacinamiento. Sí, como vivir hacinados. También se puede llamar sobreocupación. ¿Vale? Entonces, por ejemplo, a la hora de padecer el COVID o en el confinamiento, también se vio que es uno de los factores, pero cuando, yo no sé vosotros, pero aquí, cuando un miembro de la familia contraía el COVID, para no contagiar al resto, tenía que aislarse dentro de la propia vivienda. Claro, hay determinadas viviendas que te permiten hacer eso y otras que no. Y entonces, pues al final, todos esos problemas que son mayores en viviendas más pequeñas, menos adecuadas, lógicamente impactan más en aquellas, o sea, digamos que todo va un poco, vais a ver que todo va siempre ligado al problema de la pobreza y de la desigualdad. Entonces, bueno, eso es un poco, va a ir de forma transversal a lo largo de toda la presentación, pero porque es que tiene que ser así. Y entonces, pues lógicamente la transmisión intrafamiliar era mayor en aquellas familias que vivían en hacinamiento. Por ejemplo, en Europa, así por hablar como de perfiles que son más, vamos, que tienen mayor riesgo a vivir en situaciones de hacinamiento, son las familias monoparentales, por ejemplo. O sea, sobre todo que están encabezadas principalmente por mujeres a cargo solas de hijos. Es más habitual que vivan en condiciones de hacinamiento, muchas veces porque tienen que alquilar una habitación y vivir con más gente y tal. Bueno, entonces, digamos que hemos establecido que es desde el punto de vista de la salud, es bueno mejorar las condiciones en nuestra vivienda. Pero es que además también tiene sentido desde el punto de vista económico, aunque es una cosa que no se estudia o no se evalúa de una manera muy sistemática hasta ahora. O sea, digamos que ¿esto por qué es? Porque no se hace, digamos que las cuentas o los gastos que se hacen de salud o de los servicios sanitarios van por un lado y los gastos en reformas, en mejoras de la vivienda y tal, van por otro. Y de hecho, muchas veces los gestionan administraciones distintas. Y entonces eso hace que, a pesar de que mantener unas malas condiciones de la vivienda que impactan la salud y generan pues enfermedades y tratamientos luego, muchos crónicos, que tienes que atender, eso es muchísimo más caro que resolver el problema. Desde el principio con una rehabilitación adecuada, una reforma, es muchísimo más caro. Pero es eso, o sea, no tenemos esa visión de conjunto ni esos vínculos, y muchas veces es pues porque el que paga la reforma no es el mismo que el que se ahorra el dinero del servicio sanitario, ¿no? Pero bueno, o sea, son unos vínculos que por eso hay pocos estudios que lo hayan hecho, pero ha habido uno en Reino Unido que luego se extrapoló a otros países europeos y que sí que, por ejemplo, estimaba que, que cada 3 euros invertidos en mejoras en la vivienda, de media en Europa, 2 euros se amortizarían en un solo año. Y en menos de 2 ya se amortizaría, o en 2 o así se amortizarían los 3 euros. Y además luego lo diferenciaba por países, ¿no? Entonces yo aquí tengo destacado, en el caso de España es incluso más rápido la amortización, en menos de un año ya se amortizaría. Pero bueno, claro, es lo que digo. O sea, tiene estas dificultades que son pues sistémicas de cómo funciona el mundo y las ciudades y todo. Pero que, o sea, debemos saber que hay incluso, o sea, hay un argumento también económico en esto. Lo que pasa que, bueno, pues ya digo, con sus barreras y limitaciones, ¿no? Entonces, los vínculos entre vivienda y salud tradicionalmente se han abordado sobre todo desde el punto de vista de la eficiencia energética. O sea, sabemos, y lo sabéis vosotros mucho, seguro también la importancia de que las viviendas estén bien aisladas y que sean energéticamente más eficientes, y eso es verdad que tiene muchas ventajas y tiene posibles efectos positivos sobre la salud, pues por la economía del hogar, o sea, reducción del estrés a través de importes de las facturas más bajos, que no solo reducción del estrés, también más dinero disponible para dedicar a alimentación saludable, a gastos en sanidad si los hubiera, o sea que todo va un poco así, pero también mayor confort térmico. Luego, menos emisiones de gases de efecto invernadero, pues por la necesidad de otros, o sea, de calefacciones o de aire acondicionado, ¿no? Y también incluso se habla de que puede traer, digamos, empleos más verdes dentro del sector de la construcción, ¿no? Entonces, no es que no tenga efectos positivos, pero es verdad que a veces se ha reducido a eso los vínculos entre vivienda y salud. Y lo que nosotros un poco defendemos también es que el comportamiento energético no es el que cubre todos los factores de la vivienda y su entorno inmediato que pueden afectar a las residencias residentes, ¿no? Entonces, bueno, vamos a hablar de otros temas también que son importantes. Entonces, no que no sea importante mejorar la eficiencia energética, pero de hecho, incluso también hay que ver hasta qué punto eso compagina bien con la calidad del aire interior, porque lo que sí que se ha encontrado también al hacer cada vez más herméticas las viviendas, que desde un punto de vista energético es muy interesante, porque al mismo tiempo, si no se combina con una buena ventilación de los espacios, estamos empeorando la calidad del aire interior y haciéndola bastante peor incluso que la exterior. O sea que todo tiene sus, bueno, todo tiene sus matices, ¿no? Entonces, o sea, sabemos, por ejemplo, bueno, sonarán, claro, los sistemas de certificación, cada vez hay más, empezaron, como decía, muy por la vía de la eficiencia energética, ¿no? Y sostenibilidad, y se ha ido ampliando un poco el espectro. Por suerte parece que se va abriendo un poco más a una perspectiva de salud, pues, por ejemplo, con las certificaciones WELL, con el visita. Y de hecho, o sea, sí que hay algunos estudios que te hablan de que edificios verdes frente a los que no están certificados como verdes potencialmente podrían reducir el síndrome de edificio enfermo y ese tipo de cosas. ¿Sabéis el síndrome de edificio enfermo lo que es?
Sí.
¿Sí? Eso, vale. Muy bien. Pues nada, entonces, o sea, yo os quería preguntar qué aspectos de la vivienda y de su entorno inmediato valoráis más. A ver si alguno me puede decir alguna cosa y luego vemos si coincide con lo que
Yo que es seguro.
La seguridad. Ah, vale. Venga. No me esperaba esa. ¿Alguna más?
Privacidad, como buen mexicano.
Buena ubicación.
Buena ubicación, ¿cómo lo defines eso?
Que esté cerca de rutas de transporte.
Ah, vale. ¿Y eso qué significa exactamente? ¿Que se puedan abrir bien las ventanas o que tenga un sistema ventilación cruzada y todo eso? Vale. ¿Alguna?
Espacios verdes. O sea,
¿Dentro de la propia vivienda?
Sí, o sea,
¿O vistas?
Las dos.
las dos. O sea, probablemente sales de tu casa, bueno, en mi caso en México hay un jardín.
¿A qué suerte?
Y aquí, sí.
Pues bueno, luego os contaré, hay estudios que se han
han
hecho, sobre todo durante el confinamiento, se han hecho algunos en Italia, que dicen que aquellas personas que desde su vivienda tenían vistas a espacios verdes tenían menos riesgo de depresión y mejor salud mental en general, mejor sensación de bienestar.
Yo igual había leído algo así que una persona tiene que pasar al día como 10 minutos, una cosa así, para que, o sea, en un entorno verde, para que sea más feliz.
Sí, bueno, a ver, lo de los 10 minutos al final se intenta poner un poquito como alguna aproximación, pero o sea, sí que hay cada vez más estudios y más evidencia científica que relaciona exposición a espacios verdes con mejor salud, desde muchos puntos de vista y tal. De hecho, ahora hay como una regla del 330-300, no sé si os suena, ¿sí te suena?
Sí.
Vale.
Que desde tu ventana tienes que ver 3 árboles, no jugar 3 árboles.
Sí, el 3 es desde la vivienda, que son ver por lo menos 3 árboles de cierta envergadura desde tu vivienda, ¿no? Que parece fácil, pero no siempre es así. Desde la mía no se ven.
Aquí tampoco vemos un solo árbol.
¿El 30, te acuerdas?
El 30, creo que era el espacio de abierto
¿Porcentaje?
Es un porcentaje. Es el porcentaje dentro del barrio, vamos, del distrito. Ahí ya no sé muy bien cómo se mediría exactamente, pero que hubieran por lo menos un 30% de cobertura verde dentro de lo que es el barrio.
No, que de nuestro depa que arrendamos tampoco se ve.
No sé un solo árbol.
¿Y el 300?
Fueran 300 metros cuadrados.
Es 300 metros lineales hasta un parque de por lo menos 1 hectárea de superficie. O sea, no hablamos de un parquecito chiquitín, sino un parque con vegetación suficiente y que esté toda vivienda como a por lo menos 300 metros. Bueno, esto no se cumple.
Sí.
Hay muchísimas ciudades en las que no se cumple. Pero bueno, sí que es verdad que esa regla que parece así un poco, o sea, no es que todos lo tengan que cumplir, sería ideal si se pudiese, pero que sí que habla de cómo, o sea, hay evidencia científica no solo de que sea bueno ir a un gran parque, sino también ver naturaleza desde tu propia vivienda o tener, pues eso, o sea, o tener naturaleza a tu alrededor, incluso si no la estuvieras viendo, porque mitiga la isla de calor, porque mejora la calidad del aire, etcétera. O sea que tiene todos esos beneficios distintos, ¿no?
También
Bueno.
un poco es la iluminación eso, ¿no? También es un poco como la exposición a la luz solar y a la iluminación también es un poco lo que trae eso. O sea, todas las bienestar mental y así también digo que es un poco...
Claro, o sea, cuando sales al exterior, también la exposición a luz solar directa, siempre que sea controlada, o sea, que no nos quememos, ¿no? Y que estemos como arriesgando el melanoma, también sí, o sea, nos aumenta los niveles de vitamina D. Y entonces la vitamina D luego es protectora de muchas otras enfermedades, ¿no? Entonces, o sea, sí, obviamente está todo relacionado porque también el salir a espacios verdes muchas veces implica mayor actividad física, de modo que es que al final todo, o sea, tiene muchos que se llaman cobeneficios, ¿no? O cobeneficios múltiples, o sea, desde muchos puntos de vista. Y por eso también, o sea, se van estudiando desde distintas perspectivas, pero al final, digamos que son positivos y salen rentables, ¿no? Bueno, yo os preguntaba qué eran las cosas que más valorabais o que más os gustaban, o sea, a la hora de elegir una casa, ¿no? o de la vuestra, que es lo que más valoráis, pues aquí esto es un ejemplo de dentro de una encuesta de satisfacción que hace Belus cada año como de las viviendas en Europa, cosas que más valoran: el tamaño de la vivienda, que esto no lo hemos dicho. Sí, curiosamente sí. Bueno, a lo mejor no lo dije bien, no sé, o sea, era como cosas de la vivienda. Pero bueno, que luego, claro, el estado en el que está también, o sea, de reforma, los costes de la energía, pero también, por ejemplo, calidad del sueño, que esto muchas veces depende también de las condiciones exteriores o de vecinos, o sea, las condiciones constructivas, la capacidad que tengas de aislarte constructivamente, pues con ventanas de doble o triple capa, de no sé qué, pero bueno, también es lo que, o sea, el entorno, ¿no? Relación con los vecinos también, parece que a mí me sorprendió cuando vi eso, que era como algo que valoraba mucho la gente. Lo de la luz solar directa que comentaban, o sea, es muy importante en determinados sitios lo de, bueno, o sea, para mí desde luego es fundamental el tema de la luz en la vivienda y bueno, luego otros temas, ¿no? Pero vamos, esto junto con lo que me habéis contado vosotros os hace ver que la vivienda no es solo, pues eso, las características físicas, sino que la salud y bienestar de la vivienda implica mucho, pues, cosas que pasan alrededor, ¿no?
O sea,
precisamente,
no solo cómo se ve por fuera, ¿no?
No, ni por dentro ni solo por fuera, sino, o sea, qué pasa, digamos, en su área de influencia, que puede ser mayor o menor, pero que hablamos de cómo de cerca está del transporte público, cómo de conectado está, ¿no? A otros servicios. O sea, el hecho de que yo tenga que coger el coche cada vez que voy a un sitio o no, o que pueda interactuar con mis vecinos o no, o si mis vecinos me gustan o no, o si me parecen peligrosos o no.
Sí, porque eso sí es también importante. O sea, si no te parece seguro ni siquiera a tus vecinos, pues...
Claro, pero es que, por ejemplo, la inseguridad percibida aumenta el riesgo de que la gente se quede más en casa, que tenga menos exposición a luz solar, menos actividad física. En el caso de personas mayores, menos actividad física también es mayor riesgo de caídas, o sea, que es que va todo un poco unido, ¿no? Más luego psicológicamente, mayor estrés, si hay ruido, si hay vandalismo, también peor sueño. La calidad del sueño es importantísima luego de cara a la salud desde muchos puntos de vista, o sea que va todo tremendamente unido. Pero bueno, esto era solo para presentar, pero yo creo que está clarísimo ya que temas de vivienda implican no solo la vivienda física, sino también su entorno, ¿no? Entonces, por eso, ahora lo que os iba a contar son, no sé cómo voy de tiempo porque me estoy enrollando.
Sí, lo que se puede preguntar rápido, el síndrome del edificio enfermo que era, que si yo no lo sé.
Ah, pues sí. Nada, no. Bueno, a ver, el síndrome del edificio enfermo es un síndrome que está descrito, pero que del que no se encuentra una causa clara todavía. Lo que sí es que hay como cierto consenso en que el vínculo está entre los síntomas y estar en un determinado ambiente interior. Pasa mucho, sobre todo en las oficinas, y se relaciona, por ejemplo, con la calidad del aire, con la electricidad estática, o sea, con los niveles de humedad, que cuando son muy bajos también generan más electricidad estática, más como calambres, ¿no? Cuando nos da tal, más sensación, o sea, el síndrome de ojo seco, o sea, entonces lo que pasa es que alguien que padece los síntomas del síndrome del edificio enfermo, al estar en un edificio, empieza a sentirlos, lo que pasa es que son síntomas muy variados. A veces es como dolor de cabeza, algo de garganta, mucosas, ¿no? O sea, cosas así. Y lo que tienen en común es que una vez que dejan ese edificio y van a otro sitio, se les pasa. Entonces, no se sabe todavía. Bueno, es que, pues, pero no se sabe.
La calidad de vida, ¿no?
Bueno, mucho tiene que ver con la calidad del aire, los materiales, o sea, los compuestos orgánicos volátiles, estos que están en el aire y tal, pues tiene que ver con eso, pero como que todavía no se ha encontrado una causa clara y además hay gente a la que le ocurre y hay gente que no. Entonces, lo que pasa es que sí que hay, o sea, sí que se describe como que es algo que aunque no se sepa exactamente la causa, sí que se reconoce que existe. Porque existe además para un porcentaje, ya no me acuerdo si era un 10% o un 20% de la población en determinados edificios, sobre todo más nuevos, que tienen mucho que ver también con los materiales que se usan, con las emisiones de esos materiales, las partículas que salen, pero también, pues eso, o sea, con los sistemas de climatización, con, bueno, toda una serie de cosas, también la falta de vegetación, o sea, me cuesta un poco porque ya digo que no hay un gran consenso, pero sí lo hay en cuanto a que existe eso y todavía habría que estudiar un poquito más exactamente por qué y por qué hay gente que es mucho más sensible a eso y hay gente que no tanto. O sea, dentro de un grupo habrá un porcentaje de personas que sufran esos síntomas y otras que no. Pero luego es verdad que lo que tienen en común esas personas que lo sufren es que una vez que dejan de estar en ese espacio, en ese edificio, ya no les pasa.
Y la gente que lo sufre en los mismos edificios, o también eso también varía, de que alguien puede un edificio sí y no puede no ir.
Claro, es que el síndrome del edificio enfermo es para los edificios que están enfermos. Y no todos los edificios son enfermos.
Alguien que es perceptible de eso, se va a sentir mal ahí, de que sí, o también eso varía, de que personas sensibles.
Depende de la salud de cada persona también.
Bueno, es que también hay niveles, o sea, digamos que la sensibilidad no es un blanco o negro, sino que...
Cuidado con el...
O sea, no es un blanco o negro, no es un o eres 100% sensible o no lo eres. De hecho, es un gradiente, ¿no? O sea, eso es como una escala. Entonces, digamos que tu nivel de sensibilidad puede estar más alto, más bajo y sufrir por eso más síntomas menos. O sea, es variable y también dependerá en buena medida, y esto ya es un poco una interpretación mía, pero dependerá también de tu estado en ese momento. O sea, puede ser que haya una época en la que pues, tengas, no sé, como pues más debilidad o voluntariamente estés un poquito más debilitado y entonces pues ahí sufras más síntomas. O sea, que no, desde luego no es una ciencia exacta, pero eso es básicamente la idea principal de lo que significa el síndrome del edificio enfermo. Espero que lo haya aclarado. ¿Sí?
Muchas gracias.
Vale. Bueno, pues ahora rápidamente repaso lo que serían las 4 dimensiones de la vivienda de la OMS, porque como os decía antes, la Organización Mundial de la Salud reconoce esos vínculos entre vivienda y salud, pero distingue como 4 dimensiones como de trabajo, de estudio de la vivienda. También un poco incidiendo en esto que les decía, que no es solo la vivienda física, sino que son otros componentes. Está lo que sería el hogar como estructura social, cultural, económica de la vivienda, que tiene un significado emocional. Esto sería pues, también pues, temas pues, sociales, de relaciones entre los convivientes. Por ejemplo, se consideraría, entraría dentro de esta categoría cuando hay problemas para pagar las facturas, cuando hay, o sea, bueno, temas así, ¿no? Luego está la vivienda física, que son las condiciones físicas, pues la integridad estructural, pero también la calidad constructiva, cómo están diseñados esos espacios, cómo son de amplios o de no amplios, o si son luminosos o no, qué materiales, etcétera, ¿no? Esto es un poco lo que parece más evidente, pero que es solo una de las 4 dimensiones de las relaciones vivienda y salud que describe la Organización Mundial de la Salud, ¿no? Luego está el entorno... Luego está el entorno físico inmediato, que son pues, los espacios comunes que pueda tener un bloque de vivienda colectiva, el bloque, la manzana, cómo es el barrio físicamente, si hay aceras, cómo son de amplias, si hay espacios verdes, si hay transporte cercano o no, y luego está la comunidad como entorno social, servicios también, redes de apoyo, etcétera. Entonces, bueno, pues todas estas 4 dimensiones son distintas, a veces son más una escala más individual, a veces más colectiva, a veces son aspectos que son más tangibles y a veces son más intangibles, ¿no? Son más difíciles pues bueno, de hacer una reparación, digamos, pero se pueden abordar de distintas maneras y hay toda una lista muy larga, estas solo algunos ejemplos de lo que son factores de riesgo que están asociados a cada una de estas dimensiones. Entonces, bueno, aquí lo que pensaba hacer era parar un poco la presentación y hacer un poco de mapeo participativo, porque nosotros, o sea, lo que hemos hecho también en nuestro trabajo sobre vivienda y salud es hacer como una revisión de estudios y de la literatura científica que existe relacionando vivienda con salud. Tanto la vivienda física, con la dimensión de la vivienda física, como del entorno y de la comunidad. Y entonces, bueno, o sea, mi idea era hacer un poco eso, Y luego ya retomamos en la última, a ver, son las 5. Teníamos que parar a las 6, ¿no? O un poquito antes. Sí, o un poquito antes. Vale, bueno, intento antes. Vale, luego retomamos como en media horita o 40 minutos, retomamos. Entonces, vale, a ver, lo que he preparado. Aquí necesito colaboración. La idea es que vayamos un poco sacando ideas de qué cosas pueden ser relevantes. Ya hemos dicho algunas, ¿no? Que puedan ser relevantes para la salud en relación con la vivienda. Y entonces luego ya las vamos como agrupando en grandes grupos y luego os cuento cómo las hemos agrupado nosotros para ver si coincide en algo o qué. Y yo también he preparado algunos, bueno, os he traído aquí por si queréis usar para que luego pongamos como en la mesa, para que los podamos mirar todos. Y luego yo os he traído algunos datos que puedan ser de interés para según qué casos, para según qué cosas. ¿Tenéis bolígrafos o...?
Sí.
Vale, bueno, si podéis ir pasando.
Sí.
No sé cuánto.
Mucho gusto.
Bienvenido.
Nice to meet you.
Nice meeting you.
Yeah, excellent.
Excellent. Thank you for collaborating
course.
with all the rest of lectures from the IS Global. I'm Juan Carlos Saenz. I'm the director of the program on this side of the Atlantic. Maria Bustamante is in situ, you know. We are grateful to have her with us as she traveled with for our trip to London. And as you may know, the program has 3 main components: the Design Research Studio, the seminar that you are in a way part of, and also the studio, the field trip. So in a way, thank you very much for your contribution, your interest, and looking forward.
Excellent, excellent. And thank you for the invitation.
My pleasure.
Excellent. So everybody's okay if I speak in English?
Yes.
Yeah. Perfect. At any moment, you know, very good. Very good. Perfect. If at any moment you don't understand something, please just tell me, because I live here. I can speak Spanish, but of course I'm from New York, so I can speak better in English. So, so just any moment, if something doesn't make sense to you, you know, please just let me know. My idea today was, I think this topic might be a little bit different than maybe some of the other topics. Well, I mean, I guess there's a lot of different topics that you're hearing lectures about. So I'm going to talk about something called placemaking, and we'll get into it in a moment. But my idea was that we spend 45 minutes, 1 hour maximum here, and then we do a little bit of we walk about 15 minutes to a site here in the Old City, and we do a little bit of an observation using a pretty simple evaluation technique. There's more, you know, you can definitely get more sophisticated and more complicated, but just to give you a taste of what placemaking is about and how you should be how placemakers look at spaces. So it'll be like a mini practice. Okay. And I could always send more materials if something, you know, if someone's super interested in this and they want to see some of the other tools that can be used, I can always send you more materials. Okay. Okay. Excellent. So so placemaking and how. Introduction. Oops. Can I go back one?
I think now you can use it.
Yeah. Okay. Perfect. Okay. So just so I, you probably have to do this with every person that comes in, but just so I understand a little more about you, I just put 2 simple questions, and maybe we could go around the room and you could just answer these 2 simple questions. So where are you from? I think you're all probably from similar areas.
Yeah, we're from Mexico City.
All from Mexico.
She's from Puebla.
Okay.
So
We are from Mexico City, Maria.
Okay.
Maria. We're from Mexico City. And
Okay.
he's from Puebla.
From Puebla, which is not too far, right? It's
No,
like a couple hours south.
From
Yeah.
Tabasco.
Tabasco. Where's Tabasco? I don't.
Near Cancun.
Oh, okay.
In the
Okay,
south.
of course. I went there. I'm ashamed to say, but as a college student, university student.
Like spring
Yeah,
break.
spring break.
They go crazy at spring break.
I was one of those people. Maybe not the craziest one, but I was one of them.
Okay, so it's spring break.
So yeah, first of all, I love Mexico. Obviously, from New York. I think first of all, every American loves Mexican food. Like it's just like whenever we go to places, we don't look for hamburgers. We look for like what we think is Mexican food. It's probably more like Tex-Mex, but also I've traveled a lot to Mexico, to Chiapas, to Oaxaca, to more from Mexico City south, not so much north, I don't think. But I've always had really great experiences in Mexico. So and some good friends from there too. So how about placemaking? Has anyone ever heard this term before? No? Okay. Okay, good. So that's easy. So I'll explain it to you. So I'll back up and I'll just do a quick introduction and I'll start to get a little explaining what placemaking is. And I put up an image here of a project that I've worked on, which in a moment I'll explain a little bit of what might be considered placemaking in this project. But I guess I've already explained a little bit. I'm from New York. My background is actually not architecture, it's urban planning. So it's not health either, it's urban planning. And urban planning is a little different maybe than, I think like, at least in Spain, and I assume also in Mexico, you have architects that specialize in cities, but you don't maybe have this feel of like a urban planner, I think. And so an urban planner is kind of like something between, it's maybe more of a generalist, right? So we work with architects, sometimes we're working with them. We maybe work with the community to develop the vision, and then we work with the architects to deliver the vision. We often work with all the kind of approvals and permissions that need to get, that you need for all projects. A lot of times we also get involved in the financial side, in terms of like, if you're going to build a project, or if you're going to, for example, if you're going to rezone an area, you're going to change the zoning for an area. Are you designing in a way that real estate developers are going to want to build? Are they going to be able to make enough money? Because sometimes you could put so many restrictions that in the end, nobody wants to build because their returns are too small, right? So we're kind of like the glue that maybe pulls a lot of pieces together. So we're like a little bit more generalist. And then sometimes people specialize in transportation or in economic development or, different areas. For me, I kind of have like my career from before I came to Barcelona and then my career since Barcelona. And it's been a little bit different just because I've had to adapt to, it's a different market here. So before I was in Barcelona, I tended to work on big master planning projects. And, this project is actually a park redevelopment project. And then since I've worked kind of on a mix of different things, but kind of more economic development, placemaking. Those maybe would be like the two biggest categories. And I'll tell you what placemaking is in a second. In this specific project, maybe just to point out that, so placemaking, it's kind of about two big categories, I would say. Placemaking is about, first of all, creating spaces that people like, that people feel comfortable in. I kind of think of placemaking as like when you move into a new apartment, right? You have your walls, they're probably white. Probably the apartment is empty, there's no furniture, or maybe you rented an apartment with furniture, but there's no paintings, there's no pictures of your friends, there's no, maybe you want to change the colors of the wall. So the placemaking is all that stuff, right? You move into the apartment empty and then you make it your apartment. And placemaking is kind of that. It's making public spaces, whether it's sidewalks, streets, plazas, parks, anything that the public is interacting with, you're making it more comfortable. And at the same time, in an ideal world, you're really involving the community in that process, right? So it's kind of a co-creation process, right? You don't want to come and just say, here's what we're doing and we're building it, and it doesn't really, it doesn't really fit the people that live in that area, right? So ideally you're working with the people, you're listening to them, and that's a little bit what we'll do when we go to this this area, to observe the space. And if you have, if you feel like it, you could talk to some people in the spaces. But you're really, with placemaking, trying to understand the surrounding area, the people that are already there, the people that use the space, and trying to make it, more so that it fits them and it works well for them.
Creating an identity.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you're kind of you're trying to first understand what the identity of the area is, and then for whatever you're doing, a park or a new building, you're trying to adapt your project to that identity, or maybe even add something to improve the area, right? So, but it fits with the identity of what you already have. So just to give you a quick example, this is a project, in 2012, there was a hurricane that arrived all the way to New York. Maybe you would have heard of it, although it was in 2012. So it's actually, that's 10 years ago. And so the park got really destroyed. All the electrical, all the lighting, a lot of physical, the benches and a lot of physical stuff got destroyed, which was a great opportunity for us because the national government had money to rebuild, and we got a good chunk of money, and the park was terrible before. So it kind of needed someone to destroy it and start over. And the park is very big, but this is like the central plaza. So here, first of all, there was a process of talking to the community. It's a very poor and a very urban neighborhood. A lot of the people in this neighborhood don't get out of the city. They don't have cars, they don't have money to go outside the city. So we were trying to do a lot of different things. And this is really what placemaking is part of. First of all, with placemaking, you're trying to think about making a space that works for all different people: old people, young people, women, men, poor people, rich people. Mostly you're focused on the people that are in the area, but you're trying to think about all the different people that are in that area, right? You're also trying to think about creating spaces that have uses at all times of the day. So for example, if you go to like a business district, it's very active from 9 o'clock till 5 o'clock or 6, and then there's nothing, right? And so you're trying to do the opposite with placemaking. You're trying to think, okay, in the morning, maybe the kids come to this park, and so let's create some uses for the kids because there's a school next to us. And maybe in the middle of the day, the seniors want to do exercise, so they come here. And then at night and on the weekends, there's maybe people like your age and older, families. And so you're thinking about uses for those people as well. So like here, I don't know if I can move. You can see where all the trees are. That's an area that we were creating a lot of barbecue space. So actual barbecues where people come on, mostly on the weekends, but also on the evenings. And that's something we already had, but it was very popular. So we expanded the area. Then we were creating an area, that yellow thing in the middle there. Perfect, thank you. Okay, so I can do this. This is a stage area for concerts and performances. Under these trees here, we have some sort of game area for children. Over here, kind of a quiet reading area with some trees and chairs. Over here, more of a kind of there's a cafe in the building here. So we created some trees and some seating areas for people that were buying something from the cafe. And then the big thing we were trying to do was bring nature into the park, right? So it was an opportunity for people that don't get so much exposure to nature. Maybe, I was just listening to the end of that presentation, people that maybe lived in that neighborhood that the last speaker was speaking about. So to bring nature into the park. So this is about 1,000 square meters in area, and it's what we're called an intertidal area. So it's along the river. The river is this kind of bluish gray area, and whenever you have a river, you always have this wall that protects. What we call bulkhead in English. I'm not sure how you say it in Spanish. But we created 3 openings in the bulkhead to allow the water to come in and circulate through this. And then because it was close to the ocean, during the day, the tides rise and fall. So at certain moments, no water would come in from the river, but we created these areas that were always wet, that always had water. So that what we were trying to do was create a habitat area, right? So an area where fish and insects and birds and all kinds of creatures come in. And for example, for fish, we don't want them to dry out when the tide goes down. So we created this area that they could migrate to as they notice the water going down, or they could obviously just go back to the river. And then of course, there's like a ramp here to get down because it's kind of maybe 2 meters down from the park level. And then these are 2 platforms here where you can see it from above. So my only point in explaining this is to say that we were mixing a lot of uses, different times of day, activities for different people. We involved the community and asking, you know, would you feel safe with this area? Because people could jump in when the water rises high, it's full of water. You know, it doesn't look like a river the way it does in this picture. So with the children, are you comfortable that, you know, and so they gave us some suggestions, you know, putting some barriers to protect and always having, you know, some people watching the area. So we, you know, we got the input from the people that lived around the area, and then we tried to really create uses for everybody in the community. And that's really what placemaking is about. So, so that's just a little background on me. I think I've already sort of explained. I'm just going to jump through these questions. So, so I'm going to explain more about placemaking, but I think I've started to paint a picture a little bit of what it is. I think, for example, I think traditionally architects, you know, architects think about, you know, beautiful buildings and beautiful parks that look nice, and traditionally, you know, I think there's more and more awareness. You guys are probably more aware than the previous generation. People think more in terms of what's going to look good in a magazine, right? Like, so the architectural magazines, oh, look at this park, it's beautiful, wow, it's so modern, this building is so modern, but kind of forgetting the people. And placemaking is trying to bring back the people, you know, still designing beautiful buildings, but bringing people back into the equation. So we often say that we're designing at the human scale. You know, we're thinking about what do people see, what do people feel, what do people experience when they're in the spaces that architects are creating. So that's the idea of placemaking. And what I put at the bottom of this slide is that usually, and I'll describe it more later, but usually I think if you're doing good placemaking, you're also designing healthy communities. Because if people feel good in a space, you know, mentally and emotionally, they feel better. If they feel safe because there's a lot of activity, because there's always someone in the park, the seniors, the young people, the families, you feel more safe, right? If there's stuff to do, the kids are going to run around and they're going to be active physically. So a lot of things that you might describe as placemaking could also be described as designing a healthy community. You know, they're considered maybe different disciplines, but they're really kind of, they're going for the same objective. So just some kind of, let me think. I don't want to get too much into text, but you know, just maybe some definitions. Placemaking inspires people to reimagine and reinvent public spaces as the heart of every community and try to maximize the shared value. And that's where you're trying to get uses for everybody, right? It tries to strengthen the connection between people that are there and also between the people and the places, right? So you learn to love your local park because you see your friends there, your kids feel really comfortable there, they love going there, they climb some wall or whatever they do, and you just generally feel good. There's a lot of activity, it's safe. So placemaking is about trying to create those connections between people and also between the people and the place. And it's just thinking about creative, you know, patterns of use, you know, paying attention to the local identity, you know, the physical, the cultural and social identities that define a place. So these are kind of very technical definitions. Placemaking happens in a lot of different places. It happens in streets, which you will see some examples. It happens in markets, in squares and parks. It even happens in places that are buildings, but either you have access to the public space, you know, for example, a museum or a library. you know, you can think about placemaking that continues from the sidewalk into the building. Or, as you'll see in some examples, even stores or anything on a ground floor, you can think about making a transition between this private space and the public space that makes walking down a street feel nicer. You know, instead of just a glass wall, you can think about maybe letting the stores put, for example, flowers, if it's a flower shop, putting their flowers outside and decorating. You know, they probably have to bring everything inside every day, but they're kind of creating a transition that makes it feel nicer when you walk down that street. And as it says on the right, placemaking is not just about the outcome, it's also about the whole process. You know, you want to really involve the public, the people that live there, and make it something that they feel like they have some ownership of. You know, community garden, there's the process, and then there's also the things that you can do. For example, community gardens where people can get together and feel a little bit like this is their space. They don't own it, but they have some kind of control over it. I think I'm going to skip this slide here. So I'm going to just jump to an example, which for me, I think, I don't know if anyone has ever been here to Bryant Park.
Yes.
And what do you think of this space?
It's a beautiful place. I
Yeah.
think they thought about the people living in New York, so they made it for them.
Exactly. Anyone else that's been there, like, or maybe if there's anything that you think that you remember from the place that you think is placemaking, like from what you've heard me explain so far? If you don't have an answer, don't worry about it.
Actually, they're like people just sleep on the ground. And they own the space.
Yeah. Yeah, not like homeless, but you say like
No,
people
no,
can kind of lay down.
Yes. Not
Yeah.
sleep like homeless. Like they go in the afternoon. I don't know.
Yeah.
So after work.
Yeah.
And rest in the
Exactly.
grass.
Yeah. And I think, I don't know, if you look at this picture up here, this is actually, so this is like maybe lunchtime, where there's usually about 4,000 people a day come to have their lunch there. And then this is at usually like, I don't know what it is now, but it used to be every Monday night they would have a movie night. You could see the screen there. And usually you would have to be there at like 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Someone would have to leave work early and put out a big blanket for their friends and just wait until 9 o'clock when the movie was coming, or at least 6 o'clock maybe when their friends arrived, because it was so popular. And there would be a movie, and usually it wasn't even that great of a movie. It was maybe a movie from the 60s, and you know, they had like classic night. But it's just a cool experience to be outside. I'll show some other pictures, but you're surrounded by all these huge buildings, the New York skyline, and it's it feels like a very cool space. So if you look at this picture below here, this one that is pretty ugly, this is how it was in the 1980s. It used to be a place that was very dangerous, very, people didn't go to. Maybe you'd find a few guys that were having their lunch there, but mostly it was used by like drug dealers and people using drugs, and they would close it every night. All the entrances were closed by the police, so you couldn't go in because it was too dangerous. And they even called it Needle Park because people were kind of, you know, yeah, they were using needles. And now it's been transformed into this space that's like, it's just an amazing space. So you have, you know, you have the movie night, you have the people coming for lunch every day. One of the things, you can see these little chairs here and also over here. One of the very unique things that they kind of pioneered were these movable chairs, just normal chairs that they trust people enough that you can move them. So if you want to be in the sun, you move your chair to the sun. If you want to be in the shade, you move your chair to the shade. If you want to be by yourself, you move a little away from everybody else. If you come with 20 friends, you get 20 chairs and you put them all together. So giving people a little bit of control over their space. Here's like a sort of an outdoor library with some magazines and books. During the winter, they have ice skating, they have a holiday fair, they have all different sorts of things. So it's really a beautiful space and a very successful space. And so if you're trying to think about like, how do you kind of not quantify, but how do you put more detail about what is placemaking, right? There's this organization called Project for Public Spaces, which is down here. And they created this kind of wheel or this sort of, you know, if you ever go to the website for Project for Public Spaces, you can also download it. But yeah, feel free to take a picture. It's no problem. So they said, okay, there's sort of 3 levels here, right? There's the core ring, then there's this middle ring, and then there's the outer ring. So the middle, the core, there's 4 main objectives to placemaking, according to this tool. Sociability, getting people to interact, be social. There's having uses and activities to do. There's being comfortable and just having a space that feels good. And then there's access and linkages, right? So you have these 4 core objectives. And then if you go to this middle ring here, you say, okay, if we want the place to be social, what are the kind of things we want to do, right? What are the things we should try to do? We should try to make it welcoming. We should try to make it friendly. We should give people pride in their space. They feel proud because they maybe helped one weekend plant flowers, or they participated in the community garden, or whatever it is. It's neighborly. If you're going to uses and activities, this orange section, it's a fun place. It's active. It's useful. There's celebrations there. So if you go to comfort and image, it's safe, it's clean, it's well maintained. If you go to access and linkages, it's walkable, it's connected to other spaces that people use, around the area. And then if you go to this outer ring, this is kind of like, okay, but if we want to measure this in some way, or if we want to kind of evaluate how well are we doing these things, that's what this outer ring is. Are people using the space at night? Which means, like, do they feel safe, right? Are there social networks being formed? For example, babysitters or mothers that, every day they go to the park and they see each other and they start to create friendships or networks. So if you could measure that, how many people know each other in the park? You do a survey. If you're thinking about, you could think about property values. Usually, and this has its bad side because it brings gentrification, but usually if an area isn't so good and you improve it, you improve the public space in that area, usually your property values go up, which in some ways is a good thing. So these are like ways that you could actually measure whether you're doing good placemaking or not. And by the way, any moment you want to stop and ask a question, just stop me. Okay, I don't want to just talk. If you have any questions so far, or huh? Okay. No. This is from, you see this organization, Project for Public Spaces? Yeah. So their website is just PPS, projectforpublicspace.org.
And also, I do want to say something about the chairs, because maybe when you're like planning, you should like, we're gonna put like freedom for chairs. Maybe it's like they're gonna feel them more,
of course.
But the fact that you make the chairs movable, it's sort of like connect to the people.
Yeah.
So they protect the park and the chairs, so they don't get stolen.
Exactly. Yeah, and I think maybe like in some places you wouldn't do that.
Yeah.
In a
For
park,
example, in Mexico, you wouldn't do that.
but maybe you could find a
Why?
place.
No.
Because
No.
Se roban
los focos de las when we were making a project, it's called Mextrópoli, and it's like, ¿cómo se dice? ¿Cómo Mextrópoli en proyectos 4? It's like it's like a festival of architecture, and they told us, like, making the project, they told us, like, you can't have something that is like movable,
right?
Because of the people stealing.
Right. Yeah. No, I think, like, for example, this park has so many people going that it would be a little harder to steal. And they also have a little bit of security there. And in fact, the security, because nothing really happens there, so it's not that they really need the security, but one of the things that, it's another thing that you just reminded me of, the security is also there to count how many people are there, but they have one counter in one hand and one in the other, and they count women, men. And usually, if a space has more women, it's a good sign. It means that women are usually more sensitive. Like if there's something that doesn't feel right in the park, women are probably going to avoid it. So if you find a park with 60% men, you better think about what's going on in this space. Something's wrong here. If you find it with 60% women, you think, okay, we're doing a good job here. Something is functioning here. But yeah, I think maybe, if it was a quiet park where like you don't really have a lot of people at some times of the day, you probably wouldn't put those chairs. But if you have a park, like a very central park where some people are always coming and some people are leaving, others are coming, then maybe you try it.
Okay. And as you said, implementing this community things like the community garden and stuff like that, like so people feel like they own the park.
Yep.
Like really connect to the park, they will protect it.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, and I think that happens. I mean, for example, Bryant Park, this one that I was just talking about. So they used to also, in addition to the needles, there was a lot of homeless, right? And the people that designed, so they had to close the park for a couple of years and redesign it, rebuild it, because there were some problems that were making it easier for people to hide. Like for example, when you were on the street, there were very high bushes. So people could hide behind the bushes. So they had to change the planting a little bit so that it felt safer. You could always see outside and inside. But as far as the homeless came back. And they, not the needles, fortunately. But what happened was they said, okay, what we're gonna do is we're gonna try to bring so many people that are behaving well here that the people who maybe like the homeless or maybe the people that used to do drugs will feel like they have to behave here, because otherwise someone's going to say something to them. Yeah. So their approach was not to kick homeless people out, but just to outnumber them, Instead of having 20 homeless people and 0 regular people, we're going to have 4,000 people eating lunch and one homeless person. Yeah. And then the homeless person just, he sits next to you and he behaves well. There's no problem, Yeah. So if yeah, exactly. So here, I mean, this is a view for an aerial, so you can see a little bit better. You can see, for example, how much shade they have here. So, it's greenery and shade. This is really important to placemaking. You want, especially in the summer. Underneath all those trees, there's a lot of activities happening like ping pong. I don't know if you know this game, patang, or yeah. Like you throw the ball and you have to get close to the little ball.
Yes.
Yeah, like in America we call it bocce usually, which comes from the Italian word, but here they call it petanque, and there the games are a little bit different, and for some reason there they wanted petanque, so they imported people from France that knew, not imported, they found French people living in New York. They had these French people who knew petanque, and they had them play the game and teach other people, and now everyone plays petanque instead of bocce, which is just a little different. But there's a carousel for children. There's board games that you can you leave maybe, I don't even know if you have to leave an ID, and you can take a board game. You sit at a table, and you leave. You just return the board game. So there's a lot of activities happening here. You can see a lot of people sitting on the grass. Maybe it's a movie night, because it's kind of late in the day. And then you have this beautiful scenery around you, these tall buildings. This is a very historic, this is the library. It's a very historic building. So it just creates this really nice environment. But it's not just because of the surroundings, it's also because of everything that's happening in the park. And now, I mean, this area used to not, the real estate values, like, how much it costs to live there or to rent office space used to be very low. And now it's one of the most expensive parts of the city. So it's not just because of this park. There's been other improvements, but a big part of it is the park. So if you think about like some of the foundations, when you go to like the city level, when you're thinking about a city, some of the foundations, I mean, first of all, people that were kind of like the grandfathers and grandmothers of placemaking, obviously of Jane Jacobs, right? Which everybody talks about. Project for Public Spaces, which I've mentioned a couple times. And then this is more recent, but in the European context, there's this organization called STIPO that created the City at Eye Level book. So they probably have some examples from Mexico, but they created a book of best practices in placemaking from across the world. And the books are free actually. So if you can download a PDF, if you just put in the city at eye level, you can probably, I'm sure, find some examples from Mexico. But any good city is going to have a mix of uses. It's not going to be that business district and then everybody goes home. It's going to have short blocks. These are the principles of Jane Jacobs mostly. Short blocks where people can kind of wander through the neighborhoods. They don't have to walk 200 meters until they can cross to another street. You want a diversity of buildings. So you want old buildings where maybe artists and new businesses can move into, and then the newer buildings that maybe established companies and richer people can move into. You want density all the time. Well, if you're talking about a city at least, because that creates the concentration of people that are going to make your public spaces active, right? If you have, that's why it's hard to do. It's a little harder to do placemaking in a small town. You can still do it, but it's harder just because you don't have as many people. And obviously, public space is important. People have to feel healthy and have a relief from the city. So these things are all maybe taking a little bit of a detour from my presentation, but if you don't have these things, then probably placemaking is going to be hard for you. This is Jane Jacobs. So I was going to go just really quickly through some images and some ideas of what makes, some other things that make placemaking successful, right? And when you think of placemaking, you think at 3 different levels. You think at kind of more of an area level, like a neighborhood level. You think of like the individual streets and the individual parks and plazas. And then you think of what can you do at the building level, right? And so I'm gonna just kind of go through, so I'm gonna start off with streets and places, and then I'll go into buildings. The neighborhood level is kind of this stuff that I just mentioned before, with, these 5 lessons. So if you talk about the streets and places, first of all, when you walk down a street, you want it to look good. You want it to have a nice appearance. I mean, that's kind of obvious. Some of the things that make a place feel nice, you have shade, you have trees, you have a good ratio of building heights to the, you don't want super tall buildings and super narrow streets or super wide streets and small buildings, so you got to get the balance right. You want to have a variety of uses and building types. And like I mentioned, trees. You want to be able to see where you're going. So you kind of want to see like the end of a street or the curve in a street. It's the same with parks. You want to be able to see outside of the park, so if anyone's coming towards you, that maybe you should move and get to a safer place. So the look and feel is important.
In New York, it's about the sun doesn't come all the way to the street.
Yeah.
The buildings, right?
Yeah, especially downtown with the tall building. And that's why actually, so the zoning was created in, I think it was 1916, because of what was happening there. Everyone was building these super tall buildings and the streets were just normal streets. So you got, you never had sun. Yeah. So then they started creating, and then you get these funny looking buildings that kind of go up and step back and up and back. But that's how the zoning was designed, so that so that wouldn't keep happening. It's true. It's true. Yeah. It's funny here. In some ways, it has its good things, and also in New York in the summer, because here obviously it gets very hot, right? So I think in a way there was like people weren't designing it, but there was like an intelligence to it of creating narrow streets because it meant that it stayed a little cooler. But it's true, sometimes the buildings get a little too tall for the very narrow streets. It's definitely true. Walkability. So obviously this is an extreme. Hopefully no one ever designs a place like this. 10 old women who can't cross the street. But you want all your spaces, whether you're talking about streets or whether you're talking about parks, to be walkable, right? And that also obviously is good for health, right? So you want spaces for walking, you want a lot of access points. That's where having short blocks is a good thing. You want the traffic the car traffic to be calm. And I'm going to show you an example of a city that's really transformed itself by calming the cars and really giving priority to the pedestrians. You know, you want safety. You know, there's a lot of activity. There's a lot of eyes on the street, which is Jane Jacobs, exactly. This idea that there's always, you feel safe because there's always someone watching, and the homeless person's not going to do anything, you know, that kind of thing. You want a good balance between bikes, cars, pedestrians, and, you know, if you have parking, you know, to have a good balance, not to give, like a lot of cities in North America, Europe, maybe Mexico too, they're starting to take back a little bit of the parking on the street to create what we call parklets.
Parklets, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, for restaurants, usually for restaurants. Yeah. And it's interesting, those parklets, sometimes the way that happens is like at night, some activists will go and just sit in a parking space and take it over, and then maybe start to build something, put chairs, and they stay there for like a week, and they don't let anyone park there, and eventually the city says, okay, you know, and they say, yeah, you're right, we need more parks, we can make this a parkland, you know. Sometimes that's how that happens. So it gives you some ideas. Yeah, exactly. So whatever, this is, you know, walkable sidewalks are places where you have a place for people to walk, you have a transition zone, which I'll talk about later, and then maybe you have this service zone where you have trees, you have benches for people to sit, you have people are opening their cars, and, you know, the doors swing open. So you kind of, but you always have this, you know, you have a wide enough sidewalk that there's space for all these things to happen. It's not just 1 meter wide and everyone's kind of like bumping up against each other, you know, 3 meters or whatever, you know, there's more. Yeah, I think so, in most places. Yeah. In the old city, well, in the old city, it's interesting because people kind of share with the cars, right? You can walk in the streets, so.
It's a restaurant in New York.
Close to the Iron Flat building. It's called La Pecora Bianca.
Okay.
It's an Italian restaurant.
It happens the same. It's on the street.
Right.
The street, and the tables are outside.
Okay,
I think they do it that
it's
way
right
now.
at the triangle of the
No, it is.
or no?
No, that's actually the cafe,
Oh, like the Italy and all that.
Italy, yes.
Yeah.
There's a cafe right
Right
there.
on the,
If you go straight
Uh-huh.
to the, I think it's north,
Uh-huh.
there's this
Right.
close street, and there's a Pico La Blanca.
I think
Okay.
it's right like that right now because of the COVID and everything.
Okay. Yeah.
But it works.
Yeah.
It is.
No, New York has done a lot with this. I mean, the area you're talking about, also Times Square, they closed a lot of the streets and gave it to pedestrians. Even in Brooklyn and other parts of the city, you know. So New York's done it. I mean, New York has a lot of work to do still, but they've started to kind of domesticate the city a little bit. You know, it used to be dominated by the cars and maybe not so friendly to people, but it's changing. So, you know, you want places to be comfortable, quality. So, you know, this is kind of maybe repeating some of the stuff that I've already talked about. You know, shadow. So I can kind of skip through a little bit here. Seating is really important. You know, you want places for people to sit, especially when you get to like plazas and parks, but even on sidewalks, you want people to be able to sit down. You want a lot of activities, markets, festivals, and markets are also good because it's places for people to buy fresh food. Well, sometimes it's to buy, like the place you're talking about in New York is more prepared food. But at other times it's places for people like farmers markets and these kind of things to sell. So that's also good for health as well.
Which one's point number 3?
Point 3 was quality and comfort. Yeah. So here's just some examples of places and activities. You know, this seems like almost like silly, right? Like you're watching these two adults like sit on a swing. Well, there's some others in the background too. And in a way you think, wow, it's like kind of a silly thing to do, but it's fun, obviously, for the person. And you're watching it and it gives you a smile too. So having these activities and thinking a little bit differently than you did in the past, this is all part of placemaking, and it also makes people feel good. I mean, these two women are laughing. They're feeling good, and this is good for health as well. And probably right where whoever's taking this photo is probably sitting with some other people who are smiling too, you know? So that's the idea of placemaking, thinking creatively about how to give people activities, how to make people feel, you know, like they belong in this big public space that we see here. You know, obviously food trucks are important. Food is always a good thing to add activity, right? Actually, going back to Bryant Park, one of the first things they did was they added basically 6 restaurants. They have 2 restaurants and 4 kind of kiosks that sell, you know, smaller amounts of food. And that was one way that they always have people coming to the park for lunch, for dinner, for activities. You know, they don't even have to leave the park to go to the stores around the area. So food trucks are really good because you can bring them in, and when they're not needed, you can take them out. But you could also create restaurants and other ways of bringing food into your spaces. This is a little bit what I was talking about before, kind of the transition zone, or it's also called the hybrid zone, where it's this area right, you know, here, technically the private space ends here, right? The building. But in this case, it's allowing the people that live here to kind of go out a little bit into the public space. And there's still room to walk, and there's still room for bike parking. This is in Amsterdam, I think. This is actually a really important concept because first they're adding plants, which gives a nicer feeling to the street. I mean, I think in general, placemaking is about making people feel good in spaces. So if you see plants, you see flowers, you might see your neighbor sitting on one of the benches there outside their house, just having a beer, smoking, talking to their neighbors as they go by. These are really important things. It's making connections between people. It's making people feel better as they walk down the street. They're not walking past a glass building with no activity. You know, they're walking and maybe talking to people that are sitting there. So this transition zone, this hybrid zone, is really important, and it works also in more commercial areas. You know, outdoor seating. This area, this picture shows a very quiet area, but you can imagine, like if you've ever been to Madrid or you know, anywhere around here, Barcelona, probably in Mexico City, these areas where there's a lot of outdoor seating, and it feels alive. Like you feel good walking down those streets, even if you choose not to sit down and have a beer. Just being in that area and having these people outside, it adds to the character of the place. And this is what you don't want to do. You don't want to have these kind of glass walls that just kind of cut people off from, you know, from other people. It kind of tells people like, you're not allowed here, you're only allowed here. And that's the kind of thing that maybe in the 80s was more popular, but it's not good for creating places. So then when you get, and this is maybe more, you know, I'm not an architect, so you guys would know this stuff better than me. Maybe not this slide, but some of the later slides. But when you get to the buildings, you know, you want to create a mix of different uses, right? You want to have, obviously, you know, you might be in a residential area, but you have uses on the ground floor. You might be in an office area, but you have uses on the ground floor. You might be in a residential area, but you also have offices in other buildings. So you're mixing different activities, different primary and secondary functions, so that there's different people at different times of the day, and you're making an area, you know, more active. And also, yeah, like I said, at different moments of the day. This is kind of similar to the hybrid zone that I just described. You want to make buildings, you know, you want to create a feeling of openness. So open facades, windows that open up so you can see into the restaurants. Even if you're not going to go say hello to the person sitting in that restaurant, it kind of just makes you feel better that you can see into the space, and you can also sit in those tables just outside. So that feels a lot better than this, for example, right? So again, you know, it all relates to mental health, and you know, this is more mental health than physical health, but mentally you feel better walking down this street than you do walking down this street. And you know, this, you know, in residential areas, it's a little different. I showed you the other picture. This one's maybe less active, but there's still, you know, some plants, you know, you see a bike, you have some chairs outside. So you can do it even if it's pretty small interventions. You know, whenever you can kind of break buildings down into more vertical, you know, more vertical design, smaller spaces, you know, for example, like one of the things that sometimes people talk about is trying to have a door every 10 meters, right, to a new space, right? So thinking about small ground floor uses so that you have different uses and you're not, for example, when you have a supermarket that takes up the whole block, as you walk, you're kind of just trying to get past that space. You don't enjoy walking past that space. But if you walk down a street that has 5 or 10 different stores, you know, you feel, oh, look, here's a clothing store, here's a restaurant with people sitting outside, you know. I mean, like, for example, this picture here, there's people, you maybe can't see so well, but there's people sitting up on this space up here. They're all at this bar on the corner, but, you know, there's just tons of people sitting outside. And then you have another building and another building and another building. So, you know, it's around designing, you know, it says here designing around 5 kilometers an hour, which is the speed that pedestrians move at, right? So thinking about not how fast a car is moving, which maybe they don't care if it's a big supermarket, but thinking about, you know, the way people walk down a street. This is maybe more your area, the architecture. So I'm not going to try to be an expert at this area, but you know, I think if you walk around Barcelona, a lot of the historic buildings, they have nice details that make you feel good, that, you know, that are interesting to look at as you walk by. Modern buildings tend to be a little harder. You know, a lot of modern buildings are maybe more, they look nice in magazines. They don't always look so good when you walk past them. But thinking about how to create texture, how to create some changes, you know, not having just that flat facade, like trying to avoid this, for example. You know, you don't want to design for that. You want to design to have at least some details that make it more interesting to pass that space. Or a veranda, you know, there's a lot of different things that you all know better than me how to do, but just creating variety in the building, you know, so that it's interesting to walk by those spaces. And then finally, just building flexibility into all your designs, right? So you have a building that maybe you know what you're going to put in the building now, but in 20 years, it might totally change. Maybe you start off as a residential area and then it becomes more of an office area. Or it starts off as a more artist area and it grows into an area that has offices. And on the ground floors, the uses change, right? So you want to build in a lot of flexibility to your spaces. Having tall ground floors, like 4 meters high, that can accommodate different things. Like, for example, my daughter goes to she goes to classes to learn, it's called circus classes, right? She's not really going to become part of the circus, but they do a lot of acrobatics and everything. And they need tall ceilings to hang, you know, the tela that you climb up and those rings that you climb into. And if you build very low ceilings, you're not going to be able to do those kind of things. So the more flexibility, you know, if you build 4-meter high ground floors, you have more flexibility. Small units, you know, small spaces that maybe can be combined if you ever need a bigger space, but it allows, you know, sometimes a new business can't afford a big space. They want, I don't know, 30 square meters. They don't want 100 square meters or 500 square meters. So it adapts over time. So this was that city that I was telling you that really kind of transformed itself. It was a city that was totally dominated by cars, people driving through the center of the city just to get to the other side of the city. They didn't even want to go to the center. They were just crossing. People, you know, dando vueltas, just looking for parking spaces, parking in front of these beautiful historic buildings. This is actually on the Camino de Santiago. And so everything was about the car. It was designed around the car, even though it had this beautiful architecture. And the mayor that was elected about 20 years ago, he ran on a platform. He said, cars, we're going to kick them out. We're going to, instead of the cars being first and the pedestrians being last, we're going to flip it. We're going to say the city belongs to the people and the cars have to fit in, right? So of course, we're still going to have streets that you can drive on, but we're going to have a lot of streets that are pedestrian, just for pedestrian. We're going to have streets that are shared, for example, for deliveries, for getting to your garage where you park in your building. For example, this street here on the right is actually a shared street, but it's dominated by the pedestrian. And when a car comes, they move very slowly and they wait for people to clear out of their way. And this city now, you know, children, like something like 60% or 70% of children walk to school. There's a lot more public space that they can have parties and festivals and farmers markets and all different things. And it's really just a beautiful city. If you ever get a chance to visit it, I would recommend. We're actually doing our placemaking conference in September in this city because it's like a best practice in placemaking. Of course, there's always things they can improve, but they've done a lot of good stuff. So I'm gonna kind of maybe just thinking. I think I'll just finish with this slide of the benefits of placemaking. So this is going back to Project for Public Spaces. And there's a lot of benefits. And not all of them are directly health benefits. But for example, you know, by making a place more comfortable, you know, usually you're making it more visually pleasing. You know, there's more stuff going on, so it's more stimulating. You feel more like you belong to the place. So there's a lot of benefits, right? But in this here, I've highlighted what I think are like the most directly related to health, right? Some of them I've already started to read. When you like the place that you're walking in or that you're visiting, you feel better. When you feel like there's a lot of activity, there's a lot of people, there's a lot of things happening, your kids are happy there, there's things for them to do, you can go with friends, you feel like you belong in that space. All these things make you feel better mentally, which is good for health. Anything that gets, you know, you can design games for children, you can design football fields for, you know, for anyone. Thinking about, you know, creating spaces for people to be active, whether it's, you know, with sports or whether it's just making them want to walk down the street because it's enjoyable. All these things are good for physical and mental health. You know, where you bring food into these spaces, where you make it more secure, where you make people feel included, you know, where kids can walk to school, like I was just saying. And a lot of times when you make areas more attractive and more desirable, then the ground floors get more active, the businesses are more successful, and you end up creating better jobs, right? There's, you know, instead of building an IKEA or a big store on the outside of the city, now all those little ground floor stores in the middle of your city are full, right? And there's very low vacancy and people shop there instead of taking their car and driving outside the city. You know, improving sociability, having a mix of people, a diverse population, having women, children, and elderly. You know, I mentioned before the counts of the men and the women. You know, having older people and children are also a good sign. You know, again, when you just have men, you got to think about if there's something wrong with your space. When you have women, elderly, and children, you're probably doing a good job. And just creating like this last point here, creating a sense of community, you know, and where the community feels like they've participated in creating the space. So I haven't talked so much about the kind of co-creation, but in trying to get to all these things, you know, when you're designing streets, you're designing plazas, you're designing new communities, you want to involve people as much as possible in that process. So that's kind of, I mean, I had a couple other points here about health, but I think my general point about health is that if you're doing good placemaking, you're doing good, you know, you're probably designing healthy communities. So I'll just show you quickly, and then let's talk if we have any questions. I had another slide I'll just jump to. We're going to take a visit to, so there's two streets that are really just one street, but there's kind of a separation that you'll see when we get there. One is called Ayala Vermell, which I'm not sure what Ayala means, but Vermell is red. and Pol de la Figuera. So again, I can't even translate these things for you, but those are the names. So this is an area that, you know, the old city in general was in bad shape in the 1980s, but there was a lot of improvements done in the 80s and 90s, especially around the Olympics. And there was a lot of improvement, but that now the area has become, just like the whole old city, it's become so successful that it's gentrified and it's attracted a lot of tourists. So now the area starts to lose the feeling of community and it gets more expensive. And so a lot of people who were part of this community that made this area better for 20 or 30 years are leaving now, right? And so it's not to say it's in terrible shape. There's still, you know, these are still nice areas, but you start to see some problems, and one area more than the other, which you can observe yourself when we get there. But you know, there's some public housing, so there's always going to be some people who are lower income, but a lot of the other people have been pushed out, and so you know, the area is changing. And so it's about a 15-minute walk from here. We're kind of somewhere down here in this corner, and we're going to walk up here through the old city, and then it's, you know, there's these two streets. So Pol de la Figuera is kind of this higher part, and then there's this kind of divider, I think here or here, maybe it's here, and then there's the Plaza or Calle Ayala Vermey, which is this lower part. So there are two different areas, and what we're going to do is use this playscape, and I printed copies for everyone to use. Let's see, depending on how much time we have. Yeah, so we have an hour. It'll probably take us 15 minutes to get there. So maybe what we can do is, what I would suggest is, I'll explain this place game to you in a second, but maybe we divide up into groups of 2, and maybe, I think we have 8 people, is that correct?
Yeah.
Or 9, so maybe one group is 3 people or whatever. We can do maybe half the people go to one of the areas and half go to the other. So one goes to Pol de la Figuera, one goes to Ayala Vermey. I mean, they're right next to each other. And then we can meet again and we can kind of compare our observations.